If you want to support the Missing Witches Project, find out how at missingwitches.com and pre-order New Moon Magic, 13 Anti-Capitalist Tools for Resistance and Re-enchantment by Risa Dickens and Amy Torrett.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch.
Be a witch, be a witch, be a witch, be a witch, be a witch.
You must be a witch.
Welcome, listeners. Welcome, witches. Welcome, painters and bosom buddies, artists and word witches, my late blooming lilacs and the blue jay that is picking the butterflies out of the lilacs and eating them on my lawn, breaking my heart and delighting me at the same time. Welcome to all of our conflicted and messy feelings. And also to that feeling that I hope you know of the moment when you recognize a friend who walks into a room and you have the sheer delight of a magical friendship. And welcome especially to author Claire McMillan. Welcome home to the Missing Witches podcast. It's so exciting to see your face after just being so in love with your book in these spring days.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here. As I was saying, I'm a fan of the podcast to begin with, so it's a real treat to talk to you.
It's wild. It's wild that anyone ever listens, do you know?
Or reads your book.
Or reads.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It was such a pleasure to get your email and to go tumbling down the rabbit holes of some of the creative worlds that you've been in. I spent this morning for a while just reading about Edith Wharton because I read in your bio that you're a trustee on the home that she designed.
Yes,
which is,
correct.
A detour, but I just got so excited about the different creative worlds of women that you have been involved in writing your novels.
Yeah, I mean, Edith was she is my favorite writer. And I spent some time at the Mount in residency. They have a writers in residence program. And she wrote ghost stories. And the thing with her house is that there are ghost dogs. So when I was writing in the house, when it would start to become evening, I'd be crossing my fingers like, am I going to hear the ghost dogs today? I hope so. But I never did. But Edith is another kind of guiding spirit for me in the same way Remedios Varo is. And, I tend to find these women with these voices through history, through time, who really speak to me. And then I go down a rabbit hole and become, really obsessed with them. And so Edith was for sure one for me. And then, Remedios too.
Can you talk to me about how you discovered Remedios Varo?
Yeah, so I saw the first painting I ever saw of hers was called The Call. And I'm going to be so cheesy, but I have a repro of it right here.
Let's look at it.
Show it to you. All right, so I saw this and I just wigged out and had to reverse Google image search it because I had to know kind of everything of it. The original hangs in Washington, D.C. in the National Museum for Women in the Arts, but I just saw like a poster on a wall. And so, I Google image searched her and started reading about her and found out that she was really inspired by the tarot, by witchcraft, by occultism, by esotericism. And I had no idea that it would be a book. I just, again, similar to Edith Wharton, I never intended to write a book inspired by her books. I never intended to write a book about Remedios, but I just started reading about her life. And she had a very tumultuous life. And also to find out that she was inspired by, really for me, the tarot. I had started studying tarot. I mean, studying is such a formalized word for what I was doing, but looking into the tarot, reading about it, taking classes on it, maybe 10 years before that. And again, with no idea that it would ever show up in my work or anything like that. I just thought I was just using it for self-discovery and self-exploration. And so when I saw the call and I started reading about remedios, and then I realized kind of this other interest in the tarot, it all just kind of lined up. And I thought, well, maybe this is a book. And that's how, the book came to be.
I want to talk more about how much I love the book. I just, well, first of all, like, what a dreamy summer read. It's coming out soon. So like officially, like I got a ARC, which made me feel delicious. And I got to wrap myself around it. And I mean, I had read and written a little bit about Leonora and like fell in love with Remedios and wanted to know so much more. And I was fascinated by the same part. I mean, the whole story is fascinating, but that moment in Mexico City where they really find each other, and the magic and the complexities of creative friendship, right? Like, and you go into not just the women's friendship, but Andre Breton and Benjamin, and how they sort of sustained each other, and then the loving relationships and how they can be full of love but still such a weight, or the way that like someone's truth telling in a really close relationship can be painful, or like can be like more revealing, more hard than we're ready for. Can you talk a bit about, do you have creative relationships in your life, those moments where you recognized a kinship, or just tell me more about that moment in Mexico and what it meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I really loved about her life too, that you're mentioning, is this friendship she had with Leonora, this incredible collaboration between two artists. And you're mentioning we have all these stories of collaboration between male artists like Breton and Perret, or even I'm thinking visual artists like Picasso and Braque. But you don't really have many tales of artistic collaboration between women. And the more I looked into their friendship and kind of read about it as I was doing research, the more I realized like it really was kind of a mutual uplifting of each other. There was not a lot of competition. I had to put some little maybe jagged points in their friendship because I needed conflict, because I'm telling a story, but they really didn't have a big falling out. It was just really kind of a story of mutual uplifting throughout their lives. And I thought that's really so unique. And it's something I've felt in my own life. Yes, both creatively with friends who are writers, but also just generally, those friendships, those female friendships you have that you're like, I think I might be dead if I didn't have this. I'm thinking like early motherhood, those types of friendships are friendships you're blessed to have throughout your entire life with women. And so I really wanted to tell a story about that, and it was a great vehicle for that. And the most interesting time in my life, in their life to me, was Mexico City. And I actually, in writing the book, started it in Mexico City. But because she had lived through this tumultuous time during World War II, she was in Paris when it fell. She fled to Marseille. She was living in this villa with all these artists. So what was happening is I'm telling the Mexico story, but I have these huge flashbacks that are just like deadening the plot to a standstill. So I realized I actually had to shift and tell it chronologically. So yeah, I think like the first 80 pages or something were still in Europe, but then we got to Mexico, which is where I kind of always wanted to go and to be. And as far as I could research, they both had a lot of men in their lives always. They had multiple husbands, they had lovers, they had men in their lives always. But they were still very much kind of independent women making their art. And so that was another piece that I was interested in exploring, is kind of how are you living in a patriarchy, or maybe living in a system, because the surrealist view of women was quite reductionist, living in a system but like that, but you still love men, and so I wanted to include that aspect as well. So yeah.
Can you talk more about the kinds of love between men and women that you talk about in the story?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was constantly trying to get into the book, and it's not in the book because the book is a novel and it's fiction, it's not a biography, but Remedios had a first husband that she married, and then she had an affair with Benjamin, and then Benjamin got married and she had another affair. She's having affairs, and the men in her life, she remained lifelong friends with them always. There was never some dramatic falling out. There was never some whatever. In fact, her lover, Jean-Nicole, who she meets after she and Benjamin break up, she decides she can't really, he's such an all-encompassing kind of love that she realizes she really is almost has to choose. And she said this, between herself and him in a way. And it's really fascinating to me that they go away into the Venezuelan jungle. And when she comes out, she really chooses herself. Like that is, kind of historical fact. And what was fascinating is then she remained friends with him her whole life. And her next lover / husband, Walter Guerin, when Jean-Nicole had horrible health issues and was in the hospital, had all these bills, they paid all his hospital bills. It's just, I know, it's just amazing. So she had this huge capacity, I think, to just let people really hold on to them. And I think in part that was because, she was living this bohemian kind of artistic life. She was interested in things maybe outside the realm of the conventional, including, the occult or the esoteric. And then I also think because she was essentially, a refugee who relocated from Europe to Mexico, they kind of created their own chosen family there. And you didn't really cut people out of that lightly. So.
Yeah. It seems also like there's something about the ability to tell a complicated truth, at least in the way that you describe her and Leonora in the story, that they can keep those relationships with men because they're honest about what they love about them, and also where they need to go next, who they are. They somehow found a freedom to be really, to choose themselves, and in being honest about choosing themselves, it's, some people can't respect that, but a lot of good people probably could.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I kind of told the story with Jean-Nicole, but before that with Benjamin, Benjamin Pérez was almost 15 years older than she was, and very famous for being a poet and being a surrealist and everything. So at some point, yeah, you're exactly right. She did have to kind of choose herself in a way to get out from just under the dynamics of that. And I think it was quite mutual. And again, they remained friends, and he went back to France and she remained in Mexico. But the only time she ever went back to Paris was right before Benjamin was dying, to say goodbye to him and to be there. Yeah, she had just a huge capacity to hold people in her life, I think. And that's super appealing.
You talk about the tension or the alchemy involved in navigating research and memoir and then transforming it into a story.
I mean, research is the most fun part, right? You could research forever and ever and ever. This, I'm sure, because so much research goes into your podcasts and your books. I have a friend who writes nonfiction, and I asked her, I said, so when do you know it's time to stop researching? When do you know it's time to write? And she's like, when the money runs out, that's when I start writing. And I was like, right. But another friend of mine who writes as well, historical fiction, said, she kind of researches until she has an idea of story, and until she can write a scene, and then she'll go in and write the scene. And you're kind of always researching as you're writing, because a novel like this, the reason people are reading really is, I think, for that emotional truth of the character, for for the emotional journey they're going on. And so, that's less reliant on research. That's an emotional thing inside yourself. But yeah, research adds like the pretty set dressing and, makes things believable. And there's also the structure of kind of the timeline of her life, which, was factual. And I definitely, like I said, I jettisoned things like the first husband's just gone, or, a lot of the lovers too. I tried to write them. And then the book became about men and, and her relationship to men. And that's fine. That's a great book. It wasn't the book I wanted to write. I wanted to write really a book about her and centered on her art, and then also about her friendship. Yeah,
that's so interesting. We've tried really hard in our work to find the like female researcher, or find the women's story, or find the like queer story, but it's constant work because it creeps in and and it's not that those stories about men aren't worth telling. It's just there's plenty of people doing it. Let them do it, But we've had moments with our editor in the book where they were like, we spend a lot of time in this section on like some, big important men. Do we need this here? Like, what happens if we remove this whole section? Maybe we don't need Joseph Campbell at all. Who else is there, And I think we've really benefited from people taking up that challenge with us and being like, can we do more? Can we go further?
I mean, poor unknown Joseph Campbell, right?
If only someone would.
Right. I mean, but yeah, that is it. Actually, it's surprising. I think what you're saying too is surprising how much actual conscious focus it takes,
right,
to do that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have I don't know, a tarot practice, a divinatory practice, a meditation practice that is part of your writing practice, part of negotiating between like what happened and what you're creating?
I mean, to answer that is I wish. I don't really use tarot in connection with my writing. I think a couple times during the drafting in this book, I was like, well, I'm going to try, like, I'm going to be like, whatever maybe like do next, or, I can't remember what the exact kind of question I showed up to my deck with was, but I found it not helpful at all. I mean, I have a personal tarot practice,
right,
that's super not ritualized or rigid or anything like that. And
like you sit down with it when you have a question, or you sort of take out your cards in a like sort of playful way, or what's that like?
Totally. I mean, there are times, I really find it useful as a grounder for me, and it's also super useful for me just when I'm spinning out in loops, like we all spin,
totally,
kind of like jam a stick in there. The tarot will often jam a stick in there to just be like, you can look at it from this perspective. You can,
right.
So in that way, it's super useful. But, so sometimes I'll show up to my deck every day, a couple times a day, right. But, and sometimes it'll be like, go away, I've already, go away, like it'll start to get confusing. And sometimes
I know that feeling where it's like you're asking this to it. You've asked this question enough times.
Like you've asked this question enough, like go do something else now. Like and then sometimes I won't touch my deck for a week or two, Right. And again, like the way I read or my spreads are not super rigid. I mean, I do like a Celtic cross, like if I'm feeling all formal, or maybe it's the solstice, or someone's birthday or New Year's Eve or something, like it's fun to do a full Celtic cross. But a lot of times I'm doing like a little 3-card, 6-card spread, kind of making it up, as I go along. So yeah, I mean, tarot practice has been, I had no idea that it would be so resonant for me. personally, but I don't really use it when I'm writing. Although I know people do, and I'm always a little intrigued and jealous of that, because I was like, oh, you could like get, a writing prompt or something out of the deck, but yeah.
But no, you went to it for writing prompts, and it was like, go back to work.
Yeah, I was just like, this is, I think, not for my practice.
That's funny. I get that. Do you ever feel like people talk about channeled work and you are dealing with historical figures? Do you feel like there's moments in like your flow state of writing where you're like, oh, I had not thought that she would think in that way, but there she is thinking in that way or something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for sure, I do not think I was channeling Remedios Varo when I wrote this book, just to be clear. But then, I haven't looked into channeling, but in a way, I imagine it's similar to tarot in that you're like, what actually are you doing when you're channeling? For me, the reason I enjoy writing so much is that flow state, where 3 hours have passed and you're like, wait, was that 15 minutes? It's you're gone, you're somewhere else for sure. So if that's channeling, then I guess that's a form of channeling. But for sure, always when I'm writing, things come to you and you're like, I have no idea where that came from, which is a great feeling.
Yeah, the strangest feeling sometimes, like, I guess this is pure imagination. And what is that?
Yeah, where's it coming from?
Yeah. When we spoke with Marion Peck, she said something to the effect of most artists won't admit it, but all art is channeling or something like
right. Like, and I get that. I can see that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's wordplay a little bit, like it's not maybe the technical definition of channeling or what Maryse Condé meant when she said she was channeling Tituba. Like, I think that was a pretty concrete experience for her. But
well, and that's similar a bit to what you guys do, calling out the witch, right? And people who maybe don't call that witchcraft. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's a complicated thing. I don't want to put that name on anybody.
Sure.
And cause them harm or put anybody in danger. But I do want to make a case for my own inspiration in the work that I do and say, this inspires me in my, what I call witchcraft. These are ancestors I was looking for.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you always have to be careful, I think. Like, if someone's like, is this person a witch, or are you a witch? And this is a bit in the book. It's like, who's asking that question, and what are they actually asking, when they ask that question? Because it can be like, you asking that question is so widely different from Ron DeSantis asking that question, right? So yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we have to protect each other a bit too, right?
Sure.
I see a wall of Post-its.
Oh yeah,
behind you.
Yeah. I love a Post-it.
Me too. Is this a mapping of this story? Is it a next story? Is it just a lot of to-dos?
No, thank God it's not to-dos. Like, we hide the to-dos because they've got that would so harsh my vibe. This is like, there's a straight up timeline of her life just to keep it straight.
Okay.
And then there are a ton of quotes from everyone, from Remedios to like Emerson to like my brother, just, and that's kind of something, that's in the book of it too, is I really feel, sometimes people say stuff to you that hits you so hard that it literally like transforms you in a moment. And so there are a lot of those kind of transformational quotes up there for me. I actually, I was just listening. I was just at the thing with Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I love her books, and she was talking about how she writes is she has a wall of Post-its, but it's all images that won't leave her alone, and she doesn't know why. And so she just covers the wall with post-its of these images. And as she starts writing, they start coming down as they're going into the book, which I was like, oh, that's super cool. I wonder if I could do that. But yeah, there's just like a very straightforward timeline of her life, just to keep everything straight, and then a bunch of quotes. Yeah.
How did you start to give yourself permission to write? To live a life of a novelist, to tell stories, to slip all the way in. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started writing my first book, Gilded Age, which is like a retelling of one of Edith Wharton's very famous novels, House of Mirth, which is like an outrageous thing to do, right? To take a master story and like rip it off. So I can't, like, the file was called just like Big Thing, because I was so like freaked out about kind of what I was doing. And so I think in general, I've just, like everything, kind of just closed my eyes and left. I mean, if I thought really hard about, presuming to write Remedios's story, I'm sure it would have stymied me. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of, closing eyes and leaping, and, putting, as you know, there are tarot definitions in the book. That was super terrifying to write.
Really?
Yeah, super terrifying, just because, you're like, what's mine, what's not mine? Where's this come from? This doesn't line up with like traditional tarot thought. Who's going to come for me? This sort of thing. So yeah. And again, you just kind of have to take a deep breath and do.
How did you learn how to do that?
I know, how did I learn how to do that? I don't know. I mean, this is such a frustrating answer for a writer. It's kind of just like, you do it because you have to, There's so many writers who say, and I mean, it's obnoxious, but I think it's true. Like, if there's anything else you could do, like, you should go do that.
Right.
Because you are going to be facing that stuff for sure.
And how does it work for you, balancing, or maybe how did it work when you were writing your first novel, balancing, let's put it, the magical and the mundane, like your mundane life of a young writer, a young poet. I see Emily's here. Wonderful poet. How do you balance those energies, those dynamics, when you're starting, if you have to kind of cram writing into stolen hours? And I don't know, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I know exactly what you mean. I mean, so my background was, I was a lawyer, I was a litigator for years and years and years. I was miserable. I hated it. And when you're a lawyer, you're doing like a very specific type of very rigid writing, like it's almost technical writing. And so my whole practice, and I have an MFA in creative writing, so I was still practicing law, and I was getting this MFA. I was working with my professor, and all my professors were just trying to loosen me up because, I had spent all this time writing legal briefs. And so one of my professors actually said, you just need to get sleepy and stupid when you're writing. And she's like, I want to encourage you to write first thing in the morning in bed. She's like, wake up, pee, write. And so I tried that, and it was pretty useful. And Edith Wharton wrote in bed as well. She would write longhand, and then she'd drop the pages on the floor, and then her personal secretary would come in and gather them up and go type them in the other room for her, which is like,
okay, privilege, but also
it's like, okay, Edith, like,
all
right. So no, I was like, my laptop hunched in the bed, right, trying to write, and that really helped me. And so for me, I think it's just prioritizing writing for me first thing in the morning. I mean, my kids are older now, but when they were school aged, it was kind of get the kids off and then go right to my desk and make it the number one thing. And I can usually do like a good day is like 3-4 hours. And then there's always a legal pad kind of next to me. And it has like the long ass list of everything that's coming into my head while I'm writing, like, what you have to make this appointment and you have to like whatever, and it just so it can all be dumped there. And then I feel like after those 3-4 hours, it's for me, it's like you're coming up to the surface again. You know, you've been submerged in this world, and you have to come up to the surface and like deal with your life basically. And you have like a list, a guiding list. Yeah, I mean, that's all that. Yeah, that's for sure.
I think that's such wonderful advice. I mean, so many pieces of that ring true for me, but especially that when I'm writing or in like a creative mode, meditation is really hard for the way my brain works, but I can do it if it's in between like research and writing. Then sometimes I'll slip into meditation and in going back and forth between those two things. And I have to have an outlet for all of the tasks, all the shit I remember.
Or else it's all just gonna loop. Like you have to be able to dump it. So you'd be like, in 2 hours, like, we will deal with this, whatever this is. But
I promise you that's not going to get lost. It's like, it also reminds me of Leonora taking that bad feeling with the energy and like moving it and dropping it aside. It's like, I will put that over here.
I mean, I thought that was perhaps maybe a very British way of dealing with things, you know, like very compartmentalized or stereotypical British kind of. But yes, I like to meditate after I've written, you know, like, I'm a weird after, because before, then I'm off kind of like it's everything is just to get to the desk with the minimum amount of delay
or distraction. And then what's that meditation like after? Is it like kind of coming back into grounding or?
And I mean, I don't know. I'm like, real meditators will be like, that's not meditation or whatever. But I mean, but again, my yellow pad is with me, because stuff will come to me in meditation, you know, that I want to maybe think about or include tomorrow, or I'm just looping the grocery list or whatever it is. So again, so I can dump it onto paper and then you know, let go of it.
What's your feeling been like, or what's your experience been like in encountering the audience for your books?
Well, it's interesting. So the first two books are so different from this book, and the first two books are set in Cleveland, and again, they have to do with, you know, feminine, kind of the conundrum of femininity. They deal a lot with class. And it's interesting when I'm outside of Cleveland, because they're set in Cleveland, people say, well, Cleveland isn't this glamorous, is it? Like, you got to come to Cleveland, man. And then in Cleveland, everyone will be like, wait, who's who, you know, in your life? Encountering, I mean, this book's not out yet until July, but like just encountering kind of people around the tarot. I've had, you know, I've had a famous tarot reader reach out to me who got the book in ARC, and we Zoomed, and I was just talking with her, and we did a reading, and, you know, so already I think people who love there are definitely people who love Remedios who I hope are, you know, connected to the book, and then people who I think have a tarot practice that's not a tarot practice that's, I mean, not about like the handsome dark-haired man will come into your life in a month, which, by the way, that's legit. Like, that's a great way to use the tarot too, but just who are using it in a more for more self-exploration. You know, I really hope those people find the book as well.
Hmm. Funny that you said that writing the interpretations of the cards was hard and scary. All I thought was like, I need more. Like, I want the Claire McMillan guide to the tarot.
Oh yeah, man, I'm up for it. Like, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you get from my definitions, I do like kind of a psychologically informed kind of view of the cards. I mean,
Yeah. I read a quote from your book in an episode of the Missing Witches RX, the short prescription episodes. Because I love the way you describe early on in the book, in the voice of the woman who gives Remedios the deck, the sort of like one, I love the really practical witch, like I do. I love that voice of the none of this nonsense witch, who's like, yeah, you were told that you weren't allowed to touch someone else's deck because you were a kid.
Right.
Didn't want you
the
messing
nanny
with your
was
stuff.
the nanny's trying to like keep control of you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And like you were told you can't buy your own deck because those are old mythologies keeping us away from our power. Like there's no knowledge outside here, aside from your own symbols and then the world of symbols, and you sort of dancing with your intuition between that. That's very much how I think about the tarot when I interact with it, and a very liberating way to interact with it, right? Like your fingers sort of twitch when you see it, especially Pixie's deck. I find I want to touch it, I want to play with it.
Yeah, the number I don't read professionally, that's not my calling, but I read for friends sometimes, and the number of people who have never had a reading, who see the cards and they're like, these are the coolest, most beautiful things I've ever seen. Yeah, every time it's super compelling. But yeah, a lot of that kind of very practical witch view came from my time with Rachel Pollack. She wrote 78 Degrees of Wisdom. I read that book and I love that book so much, and then I went and studied with her for a week in Rhinebeck, New York at the Omega Institute. And she was very that way. She would kind of, she would talk about Lady Esmeralda. Like she'd be like, well, Lady Esmeralda won't let you touch her cards, or Lady Esmeralda says this. So like, and that was kind of her caricature of some of those old mythologies around the tarot. Yeah. So she definitely had a very open, view of using the cards for sure.
Can you talk more about what she was like? It's so great that you got to spend that time with her.
Yeah, she was super inclusive. I'm a writer, so I go, and she wrote novels as well too. So anyway, I go, and there's probably like 60, 75 people there for a week to study the tarot, and like I'm gonna say like a good 2/3 of them are professional readers, So that was fascinating as a writer, just to be in a room of that many people who this is pretty much their livelihood, and they would start they'd start a session every morning with a half hour of questions. So as a writer, I was super fascinated with all the professional tarot questions, which were like from like the most esoteric thing I'd never thought of to like dealing with billing. Like it was it was like everything. It was so fascinating. And as a group, they were just the most chill, welcoming people. And I tell this story as an icebreaker. Mary Greer was there as well. So it was Mary Greer and Rachel Pollack teaching. And as an icebreaker, they would have you hold your deck and you face in a circle. And then there's a circle of people behind you facing out. And they like rotated you like musical chairs. And then they say, stop. And you're to turn and offer your deck to the person and give them a 1-card reading. So of course they say stop. I turn around and I'm paired with Rachel Pollack to give her a reading, right? Yeah, I'm like, what? No. And so so she chooses a card. I can't remember what card she chose. And I completely froze. I panicked. And she was so kind. She's like, sometimes in a reading, when I'm a bit blocked, what I do is just describe the actions that are happening on the card,
Right.
So I know. So I just start like describing the card, and that's how we got through it. And then as the week progressed, I sat, at her table for lunch a couple times. Like, she knew I was a writer. We kind of talked about writing, and yeah, it was fascinating. Mary Greer was doing a lot on the history of the tarot. And then together they were just showing different ways of doing spreads. They did a whole afternoon on the court cards, which was super helpful. They did a whole afternoon bringing in numerology. Yeah, it was just a really, I hate to say it, but it was just a really magical time to be with her and learn from her. So yeah, it was great.
Sometimes magical is just the right word.
It's just the right word. I know.
Sorry.
Wonderful.
Sorry,
Yeah.
cynics. The world's
Sorry
full of
about
magic.
it. Yeah, sorry about it. So, it's great.
Are there any events that you're excited about that you're doing around the promotion of the book? What is book promo like for you? Or is it exciting?
Yeah.
Are you over it? Are you on to the next thing?
Oh, like, I think I did start writing another book, but then, launching a book into the world, it takes a bit of energy and a bit of time. So I'm kind of in that mode. But I mean, aside, not to be cheesy, but aside from talking to you, I'm super excited because the Art Institute in Chicago is actually having an exhibition of Vara's work. And so it opens on the 29th of July, and I'll be there for the opening. They have I think it's over 20 pieces of her art that'll be there, which is amazing because I think there's only, I'll get it wrong, but I think it's around 180. There's only about 180 oil paintings. And then all in all, I think there's about 300 or 400 pieces of art because she died relatively young, at 54. Yeah. So, but I went, my son actually goes to the University of Chicago. So I'm in and out of Chicago a bit.
Okay.
So the curators were kind enough to meet with me, and they showed me the PowerPoint of everything that was coming.
Wow.
And one of the coolest things that's coming, which I couldn't believe, is some of her artifacts and ephemera is coming. So some of her crystals, some of her clothes that she sewed herself, like all these are coming for the exhibit, as well as the paintings. So I'm just really, that is something I'm thrilled, just to be in a room with that much of her energy is something I'm really, really looking forward to.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was poring over that link today because you had sent it to me back when we started talking, trying to figure out how I could move my life around to be in Chicago.
Well, it's up until November, so you've got some time.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, it's going to be so special. I mean, her paintings, people talk about the quality of the light in them and the incredible detail. I mean, she paints like a master. She paints like a Renaissance master. They're so luminous. They're so, I don't want to say perfect, but the detail is so incredible. And then the content, where it's like looking at stories inside the weirder parts of my own mind or something. So it's so different to look at them on a screen than to be in a room with them. So I'm so excited for you that you get to go be surrounded by that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm excited to go see it. Yeah, and I think the Chicago Art Institute has maybe 2 or 3 Carringtons that are on permanent display too. And those two, I mean, both of their work, when you see it in person, it does literally glow like it's alive. And even seeing the reproductions, they're super cool because the stories they're telling are always super cool. But when you see the actual painting, they are so alive and they do glow. It's amazing. And it's always cool for me to see the difference in their work, because they're very much inspired and thinking about the same things, but the way they approach their work, Carrington is much more free, I think, and Varro's, so precise and controlled, the daughter of, an engineer, and she's super into science, geology and quantum physics and all these things too, as was Carrington. But yeah.
Did you have to negotiate, even in your own mind or practically, with an estate? I know you heard our conversation with the family, the Carrington family and estate. Was that a complexity for you at all, or?
No, because I didn't use. I don't think I directly quote them, so I didn't need permissions for that. I had to get I used one of Pare's poems in the text, so I had to get permission for that, and I used a friend's poem for the epigraph, so who gave me permission for that, which was great. But yeah.
Did getting the permission for the Pare poem, did you have to tell them how you were going to describe him? Or
they were super generous about it. I kind of just said, I think I very generally outlined that, like, he recites it in a party scene.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, they were super generous. They were like, great.
Lovely. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I know you're here. You might be at work. You might not be able to unmute, but if you did want to ask a question or say anything, you're totally invited to. Claire, if there was any things that you wanted to talk about or things I haven't touched on yet or anything.
No, I just want to know, like, who's coming up next? Who is the next missing witch? Like, I can't wait to hear. And I've just enjoyed the podcast, as I mentioned, so much. Especially the ones about Pixie Coleman Smith and Frida Harris and Soraya Hurston. Like, they're all. Oh, the one on Marjorie Cameron. Totally fascinating. So
fascinating. Yeah. So I think we're sort of like you. Like, we have a new book coming out in September. So we're in.
I'm excited.
We're gearing into that, and so. Actually, the Marjorie Cameron and Lady Frida Harris are in that book.
Oh, cool.
In a different kind of context. So we write about the tools of magic. But it's from an anti-capitalist perspective. So it's not like shit you have to buy, but shit that is already part of your power. And how people have used it. And so some of those stories are in. We have a short list for the next Missing Witches season, but I don't want to say anybody who's on it.
No,
it changes so much.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. No, not at all. But that's so fascinating. And I think, Lady Frida Harris is so fascinating. As well as, I think I mentioned, like, this kind of famous reader reached out to me, and she reads with a thought. And I was so fascinated by that because Crowley has a lot of mythos around him, and because of that, it's hard for me to kind of get through that to what he's talking about. I kind of dismiss him a little bit, and the thought is beautiful, but I didn't have any connection really with it. And so I was asking her, I was saying, how it's such a masculine thing to me. And, but no, her take was pretty cool. So.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I'd love to know, like, I've tried to read with it and found it impossible for me.
Right.
And I really relate to what Lady Frida said, that it wasn't meant to be a tool of divination, but of like meditation on the orders of the universe, and of like, and so there's mathematical truths in there about the nature of time, and each card should be a doorway into understanding. I'm paraphrasing now, but I can engage with the deck in that way. but I find it really hard to, well, also because I find it very hard to read Aleister Crowley, like understand
Right.
what the fuck he's talking about.
I feel the same way. Yeah. So it's really interesting. And that's part two with Marjorie Cameron and Jack Parsons, right? Because he was like obsessed with Crowley and rockets, it's like it's so dude.
It's so dude.
It's so dude.
Yeah.
So I'm just, so I kind of wrote it off as like, this is like a dude thing, but yeah. So I'll
then what did those women do with it? It's so
right.
Yeah.
And that's the same with Arthur Waite, right? And Pixie Coleman Smith. Like, it's so interesting to me that they hired women to create the decks, not men, not male painters. There's something there that's for sure fascinating.
Totally. Yeah. Endlessly fascinating. Is that, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot either, but are your next stories going in a similar direction of unpacking women's history?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm always, writers, like, even when they try and get away from something, it's still coming through in their work, so like the place of women and what women have navigated and continue to navigate is, I don't think I'm ever going to be done with that. And but I was super sad to like leave the world of the tarot and the esoteric and everything. So, I have a feeling that'll find its way into my work as well.
In your research, I don't want to keep you too long. I could talk to you about this stuff.
Dude, I can go all day.
Can you tell me stuff about Patty Horna? I know she doesn't really appear in the book, but I'm sure you found her in your research, and I find her so cool too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another one where I kind of made the editorial decision. She's there nominally, but I didn't really go into the friendship, but she was definitely part of that trio. And I find her photographs endlessly fascinating and cool. And
I want to know so much more about her. She's someone that I've thought about doing for the show or
please
something.
do.
I mean, because the tricky thing with figuring out who to cover for the show is it's kind of like what we were talking about with how you really have to work to look for the women's stories, the men's stories encroach. It's very similar with white women. It's like you really have to work to find the stories beyond the white women's stories. And it's like there are many, many fascinating white women, and we have more, archival evidence of their work and their magic, but it also gets boring. So, and it's not what we're trying to do is just have like a white lady podcast. So.
Right.
That always ends up being in the balance for me. I'll have a list of like 10 white women and be like, I got to get to work because that's not what I'm trying to do here.
Right.
Yeah, but Caddy's high on my list for sure. I think it's so interesting the way they all came from their different experiences of trauma in the war and their spirit of resistance. She was very much part of that anti-fascist movement that I think we still need her energy, her storytelling in our anti-fascist work. So
for sure.
She's somebody I think about.
And I don't know anything about Alice Rehan, but she also was there and kind of friends with them as well. And the anti-fascist work, like that was not theoretical,
right?
For them, like that was no joke.
Yeah.
Because they lived through the times they lived through. Remedios was in Barcelona, and Franco is tear gassing the streets, and the day she finally decided to leave for Paris, and in part meet Benjamin, was also the day Lorca was assassinated.
Wow.
So she for sure, I think, had a visceral, real experience of what fascism is.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like part of the storytelling that you want to do, or I don't know, is like related to your own ancestor stories? Like, is that something that you draw on? Do you think about your
Oh,
your
fascinating.
mother or your grandmother or
Hmm.
grandparents' lives? Does that play into it?
I'm not sure. I have to think about that. Like, yeah, that's one I'm not really sure about. I have to
Hmm.
ponder.
I think a lot
No,
about my
for sure.
grandparents when I'm working. Funny. So I always wonder, like, are when you said that these narratives recur for you, even if you try to shake them,
Mm,
there's things that you're going to be
mm,
interested in always, and they're
yeah,
going to appear in different shapes.
yeah,
I
for
wonder
sure.
why. Why are we haunted by those particular things,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're just things that hit you so deeply. When you read, I mean, when you read Edith, right? If you read all her stuff, there are things that you're like, oh, that still come up that you're like, I'm saying to Edith, you're still wrestling with this, you're still
Mm.
coming around on this. So,
Mm. It's weird, that sense that they are still wrestling,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're
everyone.
still here. They're still wrestling.
Yeah.
In me engaging with them, they're still wrestling somehow.
And that's why you engage across time. I've read somewhere some quote that said, like, it's absolutely ridiculous to think that, like, everyone who could teach you or be your friend is alive at the same time as you on the planet and geographically contiguous with you. Like, it's got to be through time, and that again, that's part of, like, listening to your podcast. You're like, yeah, like these threads through time that
Hmm.
people.
Yeah. This is sort of silly but true. There's a moment in your book where you describe Leonora and Remedios kind of meeting and recognizing each other, like, yes, my friend is here.
Like, you're
Or,
here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did
Because
you read?
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, because I felt that in my life when you're just like, when you meet someone for the first time and you're kind of like, oh, you're here now. Like, let's go. Yeah.
Yes, I know that feeling
Mhm.
deeply. I always think about, in Tina Fey's autobiography, she describes the first time that Amy Poehler was in the writing room at SNL, and like Will Arnett or somebody made a joke, and then Amy Poehler made like a pretty raunchy joke. And then, as a joke, Will Arnett or whoever it was like, oh, she's gross, I don't like it. And Amy Poehler deadpanned and was like, I'm not fucking here to entertain you. And Tina Fey was like, in my heart, I jumped up and down screaming, my friend is here, my friend is here.
Right, totally. It's the best feeling ever. And
The
that's when,
best.
like, that, yeah, it's the best feeling ever. And it's also like when I'll just, like, when you believe in the powers of the universe, right?
Yes.
Or whatever you want to call it, where you're like, there's no way this is happening randomly. There's
Yeah.
no way Amy Poehler is being put in that room with Tina Fey, like, randomly,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Or even just the feeling of being so alive in that moment. Like, it's sometimes I
Mhm.
have to be like physically knocked into feeling like awake and electric in
Mhm.
the present moment. And like,
Mhm.
that is one of the things that does it. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it
like, oh
does.
shit, you are real.
Right.
This is real. This is happening. Let's
That,
go, as
yeah,
you say.
better than espresso shots for
Right.
sure. Yeah, yeah, it wake you right up to, like, I'm in the world right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, dear listeners, I hope when you're listening to this, you are grinning as much as we are. And I hope that you are feeling that moment of us bumping into your spiritual bodies, yelling, hi, I'm alive. You're alive. We're here. My friend is here. My friend is here. We love you so much. Thank you for being here. Claire, can you tell the people how they can find you and support
Um,
you and buy your glorious
um,
book and wrap themselves
yeah.
around it this summer?
Well, that's so nice. Yeah, I have a website, clairemcmillan.com. I hang out on Instagram sometimes, Claire McMillan, and the book's available wherever you like to buy your books. So, and if you are not in a place where you buy books, personally requesting them at your library is fabulous for authors as well. So,
Yeah. It makes such a difference if you
Mhm.
if you feel like you want to support your new witchy best friend author Claire,
Yes,
or
please.
yeah, authors in general. The pre-order magic is magic, and requesting at a library, requesting at your indie bookstore, it makes the
All
biggest
the
impact
same.
for us. So yeah,
All those things. Yeah.
do
Well,
all
this
those
is
things.
just a true delight in my day. I loved chatting with you. It was
Yeah,
wonderful.
same. We have to hang out more.
I'm coming Montreal, man.
Let's do it. I'll meet you. I'll meet you at the Remedios Varo. I just have to find a way to get away.
Okay, if you go, I will go. I will meet
Okay.
you because I'm
Okay.
looking for any excuse to go back. I'm going to go back multiple times, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, Chicago. Here we come.
Be great.
All right. Thank you. Oh, do you, this is long now, but I love asking this question. And if you have an answer, I know I would appreciate it as a writer. Do you have any kind of practice or ritual or magic words or something that helps you do your work these days, or just be alive in these sometimes terrifying days?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually I have like a set of favorite novels that are always in my orbit. So usually I get started like, okay, I'll just tell you guys. When I was at the Mount in residence, there were two other writers in residence, and what we would do some days is we would go to one of the bookshelves that had all Edith's books on it, and we'd close our eyes, we'd choose a book, and then we'd open it to a random page to see like what did Edith have to say to us that day. And so sometimes I'll do that with a favorite novel, I'll just open to a page and be like, what do you have to say to me today? Or also, it just kind of gets my brain moving. And that's usually how I start writing. Although I know I have friends who light candles, or Jane, I don't know if you've ever read James Pressman's book, The War of Art, which is, it's a super dude book, but I enjoy that book a lot. I mean, it's called The War of Art, like the entire thing's a war metaphor. So it's like very male, whatever, I'm making my quotation marks, but he has an entire invocation to the muse that he recites every time he sits down writing. So, I do think that can be super helpful. The one thing I do, I like to write in a silent house. Like, as I mentioned, my kids are, one's gone in college and one's in high school. So I like a silent house, but still, even if I'm in a silent house, I close the door to the room I write in. And that closing the door is kind of like, I don't know, you're in your container then. And I think that's maybe the one real ritual piece I have in terms of writing, for sure.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
I will turn to my novels after this for guidance.
Yeah, turn to your novels. I think I have, for sure, I always have Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. Like Virginia always has something to tell you to keep it going. So,
yeah. So The Lighthouse is my favorite book.
Oh, that's such an amazing book. Yeah.
Yeah. All time companion.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe open it and see if it has something to tell you.
Yeah.
Some
Although I don't know
words.
how I would put it down if I
right. There is that.
That's okay too, though.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. Thanks for reaching out. And it's so thrilling and wild to meet you and get to read your book and to know that we have somehow been in company together all this time. Such a gift.
Yeah. It's just absolute pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm blessed if I can be, I guess.
Blessed be.
You must be a witch.
If you want to support the Missing Witches Project, find out how at missingwitches.com and pre-order New Moon Magic, 13 Anti-Capitalist Tools for Resistance and Re-enchantment by Risa Dickens and Amy Torek.